I was elbow deep in donated canned goods when I heard someone screaming outside the Kansas City homeless shelter. Just minutes before, I'd been explaining to a stray cat why it couldn't come inside, my usual Thursday afternoon routine. Now, as I stepped into the kitchen's doorway, I saw a woman in a pristine white coat frantically batting at flames erupting from a portable burner. "Don't just stand there," she snapped, eyes wild with panic. "Okay, the extinguisher." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, Nora Price, animal communicator extraordinaire, completely useless at human communication. I grabbed the red canister from the wall, my fingers trembling as I pulled the pin and aimed at the base of the fire. The hissing foam drowned out everything except my thundering heartbeat. "Thanks," she muttered, brushing soot from her now ruined coat. "N. Taylor, veterinarian, first day volunteering." "To Nora?" I replied, suddenly aware of how my blonde hair had escaped its ponytail during the commotion. "I talk to animals for a living." Her eyebrow arched skeptically. "You what?" Before I could explain, Mrs. Reynolds, the volunteer coordinator, bustled and smelling of lavender hand cream and pragmatism. "So, goodness, Taylor Kelly, meet Nora Price. You two will be prepping the soup station today." The kitchen smelled of vegetable stock and embarrassment as we worked side by side. My fingers brushed against hers when passing ladles, sending ridiculous tingles up my arm. At 32, I should have outgrown this sort of instant attraction, especially to someone who clearly thought my profession was nonsense. "So," Taylor said, breaking our awkward silence as she chopped carrots with surgical precision, "ain't you actually believe you can hear what animals are thinking?" The knife's rhythmic tap-tap-tap against the cutting board mimicked my increasing irritation. "I don't believe anything. I do it daily. For clients who respect the process." "Must be nice," she murmured, having all the answers. I laughed bitterly. Oh, and if I had all the answers, I wouldn't be here starting over in a new city trying to outrun memories of someone who swore they'd never leave. The confession hung between us like smoke. I hadn't meant to reveal that much, especially not to this stranger with skeptical brown eyes and perfect posture. But there was something about the way she paused, knife hovering mid-chop, that made me feel seen for the first time since arriving in Kansas City. "I'm sorry," she said, voice softening. "That was presumptuous." Before I could respond, my ladle slipped, sending hot soup cascading down the front of her already damaged coat. The rich tomato scent filled the air as the stain spread across her chest. "Damn it!" she hissed, jumping back. "I'm so sorry," I gasped, mortified, grabbing paper towels. As I dabbed ineffectually at her ruined clothing, our eyes met. Something shifted in her expression, annoyance melting into something I couldn't quite read. "It's fine," she said, gently taking the towels from my hands. "Trilly!" Mrs. Reynolds appeared with a shelter t-shirt, and Taylor disappeared to change. When she returned, her professional armor had been replaced by worn cotton. She looked younger somehow. Vulnerable. We finished our shift in companionable conversation, discovering shared passions for animal welfare and terrible reality TV shows. As volunteers trickled out, Taylor lingered by the door. "You know," she said, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear, "there's a horse at my clinic that won't let anyone near him. Been that way for weeks. I've tried everything medical." Her voice trailed off, the unspoken question hanging between us. I smiled. "Are you asking for my professional opinion, Dr. Kelly?" "I'm asking for help," she admitted, the words clearly difficult for her. "Here's my card. Call me tomorrow." She was gone before I could respond, leaving behind only the faint scent of antiseptic and possibility. I turned the card over in my fingers, wondering what invisible thread had just connected our lives. The address on the card looked strangely familiar, though I couldn't place why. It wasn't until weeks later that I understood. It was listed on the back of that childhood photo we would discover buried in the wall, proof that our paths had crossed long before either of us remembered. I arrived at Sundown Veterinary Clinic at precisely 9 a.m., dressed in what I hoped conveyed unprofessional animal communicator, rather than font delusional tree hugger. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and anxiety, both the animal and human varieties. A receptionist with bright purple hair glanced up from her computer. "Own't you must be Nora," she said, her voice oddly familiar with my name. "But Dr. Kelly mentioned you'd be coming." She's in the back barn with Thunder. Following her directions, I stepped out into the October morning, where the air carried crisp hints of approaching winter. The clinic backed up to several acres, with a small barn at the far end of a gravel path. As I approached, I heard Taylor's voice, gentle but frustrated. "It's okay, big guy. Nobody's trying to hurt you." I paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. Taylor stood a few feet from a magnificent black horse who had pressed himself against the back wall, ears flat against his head. Her brunette hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she'd swapped yesterday's ruined coat for worn jeans and a flannel shirt that hugged her curves in ways that momentarily distracted me from the task at hand. "Won't your patient seems skeptical of your bedside manner," I said, announcing my presence. Taylor turned, relief washing over her face. "Thank God you're here. Thunder hasn't eaten properly in days. His owner brought him in after finding him abandoned in a field, but we can't get close enough to treat him properly." I set my bag down slowly. "Mind if I try something unconventional?" "That's why I called you," she said, though the tightness around her mouth suggested her scientific mind was still fighting this concession. I sat cross-legged on the hay-strewn floor, closing my eyes. "I'm going to need quiet for a few minutes." The silence stretched, punctuated only by Thunder's occasional nervous shifting and the distant sound of birds. I focused on the horse's energy, opening myself to the jumbled impressions. After several minutes, I opened my eyes to find Taylor staring at me, arms crossed. "Since he was transported in a trailer with red interior panels," I said quietly. "Someone hit him repeatedly with a tool, maybe pliers or wire cutters. There was a man with a distinctive smell, cheap cologne and cigarettes." Taylor's eyes widened. "When the trailer that brought him here was white outside, red inside, and the previous owner mentioned lending him to a cousin who smoked." "Thunder doesn't trust men at all now," I continued, "and he associates that red color with pain." That's... Taylor's scientific skepticism visibly wrestled with what she was witnessing. "How could you possibly know that?" I shrugged. "Shall I just listen? May I approach him?" She nodded, stepping back. I moved slowly toward Thunder, murmuring reassurances. To Taylor's evident amazement, the horse gradually relaxed his posture as I approached, eventually allowing me to place my hand on his neck. "He needs to be in a stall with green or blue tones, not red. And only women should handle him for now," I explained. "And he's in pain from an abscess in his front left hoof." Taylor's professional demeanor cracked when suspected, but couldn't get close enough to confirm. She stepped forward tentatively. "Can I—" "Come slowly. He knows you're trying to help." The tension in the barn shifted as Taylor joined me beside Thunder, her fingers gently examining his leg while I kept him calm. The horse flinched but allowed the examination. "Oh, you're right," she whispered, genuine awe in her voice. "There's definitely an abscess forming. We can treat this now that he's calm." We worked together for the next hour, administering medication and dressing the wound. Our hands occasionally brushed, sending inexplicable warmth through my body. Taylor's clinical precision complemented my emotional connection to the animal, creating a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. As we finished, Thunder nudged my shoulder gratefully. Taylor watched, wonder replacing her earlier skepticism. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "Everything I learned in veterinary school says what you do is impossible." "Yet here we are," I replied, wiping my hands on a towel. She stepped closer, her professional distance dissolving. "Thank you. Truly." Something shifted between us in that moment, a barrier falling. Taylor's brown eyes held mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. She moved closer still, her hand reaching up to brush a strand of hay from my hair. My heart hammered as her fingers lingered against my cheek. "You have remarkable gifts, Nora Price," she whispered. The space between us hummed with possibility as she leaned forward hesitantly. Her lips brushed mine, so gently I might have imagined it, before she pulled back, eyes wide with surprise at her own actions. "And I shouldn't have," she began. But Thunder chose that moment to nicker loudly, breaking the spell. Taylor stepped back, professionalism snapping back into place like a shield. "And I should get his medication," she said briskly, turning toward the door. "And I have other patients waiting." I watched her retreat, touching my fingers to my lips. What had just happened wasn't part of any professional arrangement I'd anticipated. Yet, as thunder nudged me again, I couldn't help feeling we'd just opened a door neither of us was prepared to close. 3 weeks after the barn incident, Taylor and I had settled into an unspoken agreement to pretend the almost kiss never happened. We'd established a professional rhythm, with me consulting on her more difficult cases. Today, we were volunteering at the shelter again, this time helping renovate the aging cat room. "Hand me that screwdriver," Taylor said, kneeling by a dismantled shelf unit. Her hair was tied back, a smudge of dust on her cheek making her look oddly vulnerable despite her usual composure. I passed it over, careful not to let our fingers touch. The November air filtering through the cracked window carried the scent of impending snow, mixing with the distinctive smell of old plaster and cat litter. A tabby watched our work from atop a cat tree, occasionally yawning in bored judgment. "To Mrs. Reynolds says this section hasn't been updated since the 90 seconds, I remarked, trying to fill the charged silence. "Can you believe this wallpaper?" Taylor glanced at the faded pattern of cartoon paw prints. "Actually, I can. I volunteered here as a teenager. Same hideous walls." The revelation surprised me. In our growing friendship, she rarely mentioned her past. "Sue never told me you had history with this place." She shrugged, attention fixed on the screw she was removing. "There's a lot we don't know about each other, Nora." The statement hung between us, loaded with unspoken tension. I turned away, focusing on removing the ancient wallpaper. As I pulled at a particularly stubborn section near the baseboards, something cracked behind it. "Taylor," I called. "Something's weird with this wall." She joined me, frowning at the hollow sound when she tapped the surface. "That's not right. This should be solid." Together, we peeled back more paper, revealing what appeared to be a makeshift compartment carved into the drywall. Taylor grabbed a pry bar, carefully working it into the edge until a section gave way, revealing a dark cavity. "There's something in there," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. I reached in, fingers closing around cold metal. Dust tickled my nose as I pulled out a rusted box about the size of a small toolbox. The tabby jumped down to investigate, rubbing against my legs with a curious chirp. "It looks like a time capsule," Taylor said, wiping decades of dust from the lid. Faded letters spelled out summer memories, 1998% in childish handwriting. We exchanged glances, the renovation forgotten. With careful fingers, Taylor worked the rusted latch until it gave way with a reluctant creak. The hinges protested as she lifted the lid, releasing the musty smell of forgotten childhood. Inside lay carefully preserved treasures. Friendship bracelets faded with age, carefully folded notes, a disposable camera, several childish drawings, and a stack of photographs bound with a rubber band that had long since lost its elasticity. "Camp Wildwood," Taylor read from the back of the top photo. "When I went there for 3 summers as a kid." I peered over her shoulder at the image of children gathered around a campfire, their faces illuminated in the golden light. Something about it triggered a distant memory. "Wait," I said, let me see that." Taylor handed me the photo, her fingers trembling slightly. I studied the young faces, feeling a creeping sense of déjà vu. And then I saw her, a solemn-faced girl with dark pigtails standing slightly apart from the group. "Taylor," I whispered, pointing. "Is that you?" She nodded slowly, taking the photo back. 8th birthday. I was always the quiet one. I rummaged through the other photos, something nagging at my memory. Near the bottom of the stack I found it, a picture of 2 girls sitting on a dock, legs dangling over the water. One was undeniably young Taylor. The other, a blonde girl with missing front teeth and a sunburned nose, was unmistakably me. "Tense is impossible," I breathed, showing her the photo. That's me. We were at camp together?" Taylor's eyes widened as she took the photograph, her fingertips brushing mine. "Friddle Nora with the frog collection? You were the girl who could talk to tadpoles?" The memory rushed back, a summer spent catching frogs, telling the other children what the animals were saying. Taylor had been the only one who didn't laugh. "And you believed me," I said softly. "I did," she admitted, something vulnerable flickering across her face. "And you were the first person who made me feel less alone." We continued exploring the box's contents, finding more evidence of our forgotten connection, a friendship bracelet I'd made her, notes we'd passed during quiet time. At the bottom, sealed in a yellowed envelope, lay something that made Taylor's breath catch. "What is it?" I asked. She turned the envelope over, showing me the words scrawled across the front, and truth about what I saw: "Do not open." The handwriting was childish but unmistakably Taylor's. "I have no memory of writing this," she said, her voice tight with confusion. Before she could open it, Mrs. Reynolds called from down the hall. "And girls, lunch break." Taylor carefully returned the envelope to the box, closing the lid. Her eyes met mine, filled with questions neither of us had answers to. "We should finish the renovation first," she said, though her gaze kept returning to the box. I nodded, but as we resumed our work, the dynamic between us had irrevocably shifted. We weren't just colleagues with an awkward, almost kiss between us anymore. We were characters in a mystery that had begun decades ago, connected by forgotten memories and a sealed envelope containing secrets neither of us could recall. As Taylor passed me a paint roller, our fingers touched, lingering longer than necessary. The charge between us now carried something deeper than attraction, a sense that finding each other again couldn't possibly be coincidence. "So, this is where the animal whisperer lives," Taylor remarked, stepping into my apartment that evening. She carried the time capsule under one arm and a bottle of wine in her free hand. Rain drummed against the windows, having started shortly after we left the shelter. My place wasn't much, a small one-bedroom with mismatched furniture and walls covered in photographs of animals I'd worked with, but watching Taylor move through it made it feel suddenly intimate. She seemed to fill the space in ways I hadn't anticipated, her presence making everything feel different. "Make yourself comfortable," I said, taking the wine while she set the metal box on my coffee table. "And I got glasses somewhere." When I returned from the kitchen, she had removed her jacket, revealing a simple black V-neck that highlighted her collarbones. She noticed me noticing and smiled slightly, accepting the glass I offered. "And 2 unexpected reunions," she said, clinking her glass against mine. The wine was rich and bold, warming me from within as we settled on opposite ends of my sofa. Between us, the time capsule sat unopened, a physical manifestation of our shared but forgotten past. "Should we?" I asked, gesturing toward the box. Taylor nodded, setting down her glass. "I've been thinking about this all afternoon." We spread the contents carefully across my coffee table, the photos, drawings, and trinkets, creating a map of a childhood I barely remembered. Taylor held up the friendship bracelet I'd made her, faded threads woven in patterns of blue and green. "Sin told me these were watercolors," she said softly, "and because I was afraid of swimming." "I remember that," I said, surprised by the sudden clarity of the memory. "And you fell off the dock once. And you jumped in after me, even though you weren't supposed to be swimming alone." "And I got in so much trouble." I laughed, then stopped abruptly. "Wait, how did I forget an entire summer friendship?" Taylor shrugged, twisting the bracelet between her fingers. Kids forget things. Our brains process memories differently. But to meet again like this, 20 years later... "Coincidence," she suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. The rain intensified outside, droplets racing down the window pane like tears. My cat, Edison, jumped onto the sofa between us, assessing Taylor with calculating green eyes before deciding she was acceptable and settling into her lap. She seemed surprised by the gesture, but began stroking his fur gently. "He likes you," I observed. "He's usually standoffish with strangers." "Maybe he knows we're not really strangers," she said, looking up at me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. I reached for the sealed envelope, needing a distraction from the growing tension. "Should we see what deep, dark secret you were hiding?" Taylor hesitated. "I'm not sure." "What if it's something terrible?" "When you were what, 8? How terrible could it be?" She took another sip of wine. You'd be surprised what kids witness." There was something in her tone that suggested personal experience, but before I could probe deeper, she changed course. "Did you always know you wanted to work with animals?" The abrupt shift made me pause, but I followed her lead. "I guess so. I was always the weird kid who preferred animals to people." "Not weird. Just gifted," she corrected. I remember being jealous, actually." "You? Jealous of me? The idea seemed absurd. Taylor carried herself with such assurance now. And you had this certainty about yourself. You didn't care what anyone thought. She smiled ruefully. I cared way too much. And now you're a successful veterinarian, and I'm still the weird animal girl. I'm a weird animal girl who has genuinely helped my patients, she admitted. And I was wrong to be skeptical. Her acknowledgement warmed me more than the wine. Outside, thunder cracked, making us both jump. Edison pressed closer to Taylor and she laughed. Some brave protector you are, she told him, scratching under his chin. Looking up at the window, she frowned. That's really coming down. I should probably head out before it gets worse. And store you could stay? I suggested, surprising myself with my boldness. I mean, it's dangerous to drive in this, and I have a perfectly good couch. She studied me for a moment, something unreadable in her expression. Are you sure? I nodded, suddenly nervous. Unless you have early patients tomorrow? No appointments until afternoon, she said quietly. The atmosphere shifted, charged with unspoken possibilities. She reached for her wine glass again, taking a deliberate sip before asking, So, have you dated much since moving to Kansas City? The question caught me off guard. Not really. My last relationship ended badly back in Denver. I hesitated, watching for any reaction to the pronoun. She what? Taylor prompted, no surprise registering on her face. Sid decided she couldn't handle my career, said it was embarrassing explaining to people what I did for a living. The memory still stung, even a year later. Taylor snorted. Her loss. Clearly she missed out on having someone extraordinary. The compliment hung in the air between us, sincere and weighty. Edison chose that moment to abandon Taylor's lap for his food bowl, leaving no buffer between us. What about you? I asked. Anyone special waiting at home? She shook her head. And not for a long time. My work schedule isn't exactly conducive to romance. She paused before adding, and finding someone who understands. Well, it's not easy being different in Kansas City. Different? I echoed, though I suspected I knew what she meant. I knew I was gay before I knew what the word meant, she said simply. And, remember that female camp counselor with the red hair? She was my first crush. Her confession created a bridge between us, closing the remaining distance. As the storm raged outside, we talked for hours, piecing together our separate journeys and the strange coincidence that had brought us back together. When the wine was gone and the night grew late, neither of us mentioned her leaving again. Morning sunlight filtered through my blinds, catching dust motes in golden beams. I blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the weight against my shoulder, Taylor still asleep, her breath warm against my neck. We'd fallen asleep on the couch talking, nothing more, but the intimacy of waking beside her sent my heart racing. She stirred, dark lashes fluttering open. For a moment, confusion crossed her features before recognition dawned. Morning, she murmured, voice husky with sleep. Sorry about this. Don't be, I said, trying to sound casual despite our proximity. Best sleepover I've had in years. She smiled, then glanced at her watch and sat up abruptly. It's almost 9. I have paperwork to finish before my afternoon appointments. Reality intruded on our cocoon of connection as she gathered her things. At the door, she paused. "We never opened that envelope," she said, nodding toward the time capsule still spread across my coffee table. "Come back tonight?" I suggested. "We can order takeout and solve the mystery of little Taylor's secret." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll bring dinner. 7?" After she left, I spent the day distracted, my thoughts constantly returning to her smile, her scent, the weight of her head against my shoulder. Edison watched me pace with judgmental eyes, clearly unimpressed by my schoolgirl crush. "Don't look at me like that," I told him. "I'm a professional." At 6:30, I was changing my shirt for the third time when my phone buzzed with a text from Taylor, and running 15 minutes late. Emergency surgery. Still coming, though. I used the extra time to straighten up, returning most of the time capsule items to the box, but leaving the sealed envelope prominently on the coffee table. At 7:20, Taylor arrived with Thai food and rain-dampened hair. "Sorry," she said, stepping inside. A Moranian with an intestinal blockage. He'll be fine, though. We settled on the floor around my coffee table, containers of pad thai and green curry between us. The domesticity of it felt both strange and natural, as if we'd been having dinner together for years. So, I said finally, picking up the envelope, ready to confront your childhood demons? Taylor took a deep breath, nodding. Let's do it. I carefully unsealed the aged paper, extracting a folded sheet covered in the careful handwriting of a child trying to be neat. The paper had yellowed with age, but the pencil marks remained clear. So I saw something bad at the big oak. Mr. Jenkins was yelling at Miss Sarah. He pushed her really hard. She hit her head and didn't get up. He didn't see me watching. He dragged her to his truck. There was blood. I'm scared to tell. What if he comes after me next? I'm putting this here where it's safe. If anything happens to me, Miss Sarah didn't just leave. Taylor's face had drained of color. Jenkins, he was the camp director, she whispered. And Sarah was my favorite counselor. She disappeared halfway through that summer. They told us she'd had a family emergency. Taylor. I reached for her hand, finding it ice cold. This is serious. If what you saw was real. I have no memory of witnessing this, she interrupted, voice trembling. How could I forget something so traumatic? A mind protects itself, I said gently. Especially children's minds. She pulled her hand away, standing suddenly. We need to find out what happened to Sarah. If I witnessed, she swallowed hard, a murder, and never told anyone. Since you were a child, I reminded her. This isn't your fault. She paced my small living room, agitation evident in every movement. We need to research this. Sarah's last name was Bennett. The camp closed about 10 years ago, but there must be records. I watched her transform before my eyes, vulnerability replaced by determination, fear channeled into action. It was mesmerizing. So we'll figure this out, I promised, standing to join her. Together. She turned to me then, eyes shining with unshed tears. Why do I feel like finding you again isn't coincidental? Like somehow this was meant to happen? The question hung in the air between us. I stepped closer, drawn by some invisible force I couldn't resist. Maybe some connections are too strong to remain broken, I said softly. Her gaze dropped to my lips, her breath quickening. This time, when she leaned in, there was no hesitation. Her mouth found mine with certainty, hands coming up to frame my face with unexpected tenderness. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the heat between us. When we finally broke apart, I felt dizzy, anchored only by her hands still cradling my face. I've wanted to do that properly since that day in the barn, she admitted, her thumb tracing my lower lip. What took you so long? I whispered. She smiled, then kissed me again, walking me backward until my legs hit the couch. We tumbled onto it together, hands exploring, breath mingling, the mystery temporarily forgotten as we discovered each other with increasing urgency. Later, as we lay tangled together on my too small couch, the envelope lay forgotten on the floor where it had fallen. Taylor traced lazy patterns on my bare shoulder, her expression thoughtful. We're going to find out what happened to her, she said with quiet conviction. One for the little girl who was too scared to tell. I nodded against her collarbone, knowing this was just the beginning of a journey neither of us had anticipated. The connection between us now felt both new and ancient, like rediscovering something precious once lost. Outside, the November wind rattled my windows, but inside, wrapped in Taylor's arms, I'd never felt more at home. 2 weeks after finding the letter, Taylor called me about a difficult case. His name is Ranger, she explained as I pulled into the veterinary clinic parking lot. K9 unit, German Shepherd. Career-ending injury, but he's showing severe behavioral issues beyond physical pain. Her clinic looked different in the morning light, busier, more professional than during my visits for Thunder. A uniformed police officer paced the waiting room, concern etched on his face. Officer Davis, this is Nora Price. Taylor introduced us. The confidence in her voice when presenting me as a colleague rather than explaining away my presence made my heart swell, since she specializes in animal communication. Davis looked skeptical but desperate. Can you help him? Ranger's been my partner for 6 years. I followed them to an isolation room, where a magnificent German shepherd lay on a padded bed. His physical wounds were healing, but the moment we entered, he bared his teeth, a low growl rumbling from his chest. "And he doesn't let anyone near except me," Officer Davis explained. "And even with me, he's not the same." Taylor hung back, giving me space to work. I sat cross-legged on the floor several feet from Ranger, closing my eyes to center myself. The dog's energy hit me immediately, not aggression but overwhelming fear and confusion. "And he keeps reliving the shooting," I said softly. "In his mind, he's still trying to protect you." Davis's eyes widened. "How could you know it was a shooting?" "He just does," Taylor answered simply. For the next hour, I worked with Ranger, acknowledging his trauma while helping him understand his new reality. By the end, the dog allowed Davis to stroke his head without growling, a breakthrough that left the officer wiping his eyes. "That was remarkable," Taylor said afterward as we watched Davis lead a calmer Ranger to his car. "And I tried every traditional approach without success." Her hand found mine, squeezing gently. We'd been careful to maintain professionalism at her workplace, but in that moment of shared accomplishment, she didn't seem to care who might see. The local newspaper ran a story the following week. "IT's innovative veterinary approach saves K-9 officer's career." The reporter had interviewed Taylor about incorporating animal communication into traditional practice, featuring a photo of us with Ranger and Officer Davis. "Oh, look!" Taylor laughed, showing me the paper over breakfast at my apartment. We'd fallen into a comfortable routine, spending most nights together. Or we're celebrities?" "Oh, you're the celebrity," I corrected, scanning the article. "Done Dr. Kelly's groundbreaking methods, and—" "Keep reading." She nudged me. Further down, the article continued. Dr. Kelly credits animal communicator Nora Price with the breakthrough. "Sometimes traditional medicine needs to expand its horizons," Kelly stated. "Price's abilities have proven invaluable in cases where standard approaches fall short." I looked up, genuinely touched. "And you went on record supporting my work?" She shrugged, but the gesture couldn't disguise the significance of her public endorsement. "It's not just support, Nora, it's acknowledgement of reality. You've changed how I practice medicine." Her phone buzzed with a calendar alert. "Damn, I'm speaking at that veterinary conference today." "The one with all your judgy colleagues?" I teased. We'd discussed the annual regional conference where Taylor was presenting a case study. "You should come," she said suddenly. "To a veterinary conference?" I'd stick out like a sore thumb. "That's the point." She took my hand. "I'm presenting our work with Ranger, and I want you there." The conference hall hummed with professional energy, veterinarians in blazers networking over coffee. I felt underdressed and out of place until Taylor appeared, professionally stunning in a charcoal suit. "Oh, you came," she said, eyes bright with something that looked suspiciously like pride. Her presentation was clinical and precise until she reached the section about Ranger's treatment. "And traditional methods failed," she admitted to the packed room. "And it wasn't until I collaborated with an animal communicator that we saw improvement." A silver-haired veterinarian in the front row scoffed audibly. "Surely you're not suggesting we refer patients to psychics, Dr. Kelly?" I tensed, but Taylor remained calm. "I'm suggesting we recognize the limitations of our understanding. Ms. Price identified trauma responses in Ranger that our equipment couldn't measure, but our treatment subsequently confirmed." "Anecdotal evidence at best," another doctor called out. Taylor's gaze hardened. "Sinai have documented cases spanning 6 months. Measurable improvements in recovery times, decreased need for sedation, and better compliance with treatment plans. The results speak for themselves." She defended my work with the fervor of a true believer, something I never expected from someone so deeply rooted in science. When she finished, several younger veterinarians surrounded her, asking questions about collaboration possibilities. Later, as we walked to her car, I couldn't contain my amazement. "And you put your professional reputation on the line for me today." "And for us," she corrected. "For what we're building together." She hesitated. "Which reminds me, I've been thinking about something. What if we combined our practices, your communication skills, my medical expertise? We could help more animals together than separately." The proposal took my breath away. not just for its professional implications but for what it suggested about our future. Before I could answer, Taylor's phone rang. The screen displayed Kansas City Police Department. "Dr. Kelly speaking," she answered, then listened, her expression growing serious. Yes, we'll come right away." "What is it?" I asked as she ended the call. "Officer Davis," she replied, starting the car. "He's been researching that camp counselor, Sarah Bennett. Says he found something important." As we pulled away from the conference center, I couldn't help feeling that our lives were accelerating towards something neither of us could predict. The mystery from the past colliding with our newfound partnership in ways that would test everything we were building. Officer Davis met us at a coffee shop downtown, his police cruiser parked conspicuously outside. Ranger lay at his feet, perking up when he saw me. I gave the shepherd a quick scratch behind the ears before sliding into the booth across from Davis. "Thanks for coming," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "After you helped Ranger, I figured I owed you one. This is everything I could find on Sarah Bennett and Camp Wildwood." Taylor opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were newspaper clippings, police reports, and printed social media searches. "Sarah Bennett, 22, reported missing August 17, 1998, she read aloud. "The last seen at Camp Wildwood where she worked as a counselor." "Case went cold," Davis explained. "No body, no witnesses, no suspects. They interviewed Jenkins, the camp director, but he claimed she left voluntarily after a disagreement." "She didn't," Taylor whispered, the childhood certainty in her voice chilling. I squeezed her hand under the table as she continued reading. "It looks like Jenkins still lives in the area. Retired about 5 years ago." "And something else," Davis said, hesitation evident in his voice. "And I ran a background on Jenkins. I found financial irregularities at the camp that summer. Large cash withdrawals, accounting discrepancies. Could be nothing but—" "Or it could be motive," Taylor finished. "Thank you for this. You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," he interrupted. "What you two did for Ranger, I'm grateful." After Davis left, we pored over the materials, piecing together what might have happened that summer. The coffee grew cold as patterns emerged. Jenkins' financial troubles, Sarah's background in accounting, the timing of her disappearance coinciding with the camp's annual audit. "She found something," Taylor concluded. "Something in the books that Jenkins didn't want revealed." We were so engrossed that I almost missed the text message notification. When I finally checked my phone, a chill ran down my spine. "Taylor," I said quietly, showing her my screen. The message was from an unknown number. "And stop digging into old graves. Some secrets should stay buried." Her face paled. "It could be a prank." "How would a prankster know what we're investigating?" I countered. We left the coffee shop feeling exposed, constantly checking over our shoulders. That night, Taylor insisted I stay at her house rather than my apartment. "Safety in numbers," she said. But I could see the fear behind her pragmatism. Her home reflected her personality. Orderly but comfortable, with veterinary textbooks sharing shelf space with well-worn novels. As she made up the guest room, I found myself wishing for a different sleeping arrangement, but respected her need for space given the day's unsettling developments. Morning brought another shock. Taylor's phone rang at 6 a.m., her receptionist, voice trembling. "Someone broke into the clinic overnight," she reported. "Police are there now." We dressed hastily and rushed to the scene. The damage was targeted and specific. Taylor's office ransacked, her computer missing, case files scattered across the floor. On her desk calendar, someone had scrawled in red marker, "Forget about Sarah." "This isn't random," Taylor said, voice tight with anger and fear. "Someone knows exactly what we're doing." Officer Davis arrived to take our statement, his expression grim. "I'll assign patrol cars to drive by both your places regularly," he promised. "And I'd recommend you both be extra cautious." Later, as we cleaned up the mess, Taylor found something the vandals had overlooked, a business card that had fallen behind her desk. It belonged to Sarah Bennett, listing her as financial consultant, with a handwritten note on the back, "NCamp records minus cabin 12. Said cabin 12 was the storage shed, Taylor remembered, where they kept all the equipment and records. The discovery renewed our determination despite the warning. That evening, as we drove back to Taylor's house, she reached for my hand. "Stay with me tonight," she said softly. "Not in the guest room." The vulnerability in her request melted any remaining hesitation between us. Inside, she led me to her bedroom, closing the door behind us with decisive finality. "Are you sure?" I asked as she stepped closer. "And I've never been more certain of anything," she whispered, fingers tracing the line of my jaw. "Whatever's happening, whatever danger we're in, I don't want to waste any more time pretending this isn't what I want." Her kiss held none of the tentative exploration of our earlier encounters. This was hunger and need and fear channeled into something electric. We fell onto her bed, hands exploring with urgent intensity, clothes discarded until nothing separated us. "You're beautiful," she breathed against my skin, her touch igniting fires everywhere it landed. I lost myself in her. The soft curves contradicting her usual sharp edges, the sounds she made when I discovered particularly sensitive places. Time dissolved into sensation, fear temporarily eclipsed by pleasure that built and crested and rebuilt again. Afterward, tangled in sheets damp with exertion, Taylor traced the contours of my face as if memorizing them. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life," she confessed, voice barely audible. "Even when I didn't remember you." The sentiment squeezed my heart with its rawness. I wanted to reciprocate with equally profound words, but before I could formulate a response, headlights swept across the bedroom ceiling as a car pulled into the driveway. Taylor tensed. "Are you expecting someone?" I shook my head, suddenly alert. We scrambled for clothes as footsteps approached the front door. The doorbell rang once, then again with insistent urgency. Taylor grabbed a baseball bat from her closet before we crept downstairs together. Through the peephole, she relaxed slightly. "It's a woman," she whispered, opening the door cautiously. On the porch stood an elderly lady, her white hair neatly styled, clothes expensive but understated. "Dr. Kelly?" she asked, voice quavering. "I'm Eleanor Jenkins. Robert Jenkins was my husband." She clutched a weathered envelope in trembling hands. "I believe you've been looking for information about Sarah Bennett. There's something you need to know." "Please, come in," Taylor said, after a moment of stunned silence. We exchanged glances as Eleanor Jenkins stepped into the house, her perfume, something floral and expensive, filling the entryway. I was acutely aware of my hastily thrown-on clothes and Taylor's inside-out t-shirt, but Mrs. Jenkins seemed oblivious to our disheveled state. Her attention was fixed entirely on the envelope in her hands. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, desperate for something normal to do in this surreal situation. "Oh no, thank you, dear, this won't take long." She settled onto Taylor's couch, back straight despite her years. My husband passed away last month, heart attack. While sorting through his papers, I found this. She placed the envelope on the coffee table. Unlike the childish one from our time capsule, this was a formal business envelope, yellowed with age. "I never questioned Robert about camp finances," she continued, and it was his domain. "But this," she tapped the envelope, "this changes everything I thought I knew about my marriage." Taylor sat beside me, our thighs touching, drawing strength from the contact. "Oh, Mrs. Jenkins, what does this have to do with Sarah Bennett?" The elderly woman's composure cracked slightly. "Everything, I'm afraid. Robert wasn't just embezzling from the camp, he was using it to launder money for some very dangerous people." My mind reeled at the revelation. What had started as a childhood mystery was expanding into something far more sinister. "And the coordinates?" Taylor said suddenly. "Meant there were coordinates in the time capsule. On the back of one of the photos." I hurried to retrieve my bag, where I'd stashed the photo in question, a landscape shot of the lake with numbers scribbled on the reverse. I'd assumed they were some kind of game code. "These might be important," I told Mrs. Jenkins, showing her the numbers. She studied them, then nodded slowly. "That's near the old camp property, about half a mile into the woods behind cabin 12. Taylor and I exchanged loaded glances. "When we need to go there," she said, decision already made. "Now?" I asked, glancing at the clock showing nearly midnight. "First light," she amended. "And Mrs. Jenkins, can you tell us exactly what happened to Sarah Bennett?" The older woman sighed heavily. "According to my husband's notes, she discovered the financial discrepancies, confronted him, there was an argument. She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "NT pushed her," Taylor supplied, voice tight. "And saw it happen. She hit her head." Mrs. Jenkins looked startled, then resigned. "Yes. Robert wrote that it was an accident, that he never intended to hurt her. He panicked afterward." "Did he bury her in the woods?" I asked, the question brutal in its directness. "Satai don't know," she admitted. "His confession doesn't specify. But if those coordinates mean what I think they do." We spent another hour extracting everything Mrs. Jenkins knew, which wasn't much. Robert had kept his secrets well. By the time she left, promising to meet with Officer Davis the next day, it was nearly 2 a.m. "One should try to sleep," I suggested, though adrenaline still coursed through my veins. Taylor nodded absently, already pulling up maps on her phone. "T's coordinates are about an hour's drive from here. If we leave at 6, we can be there by sunrise." Despite her exhaustion, she was beautiful in her determination, hair mussed, eyes intense with purpose. I kissed her lightly, drawing her attention back to the present. "And we'll find the truth," I promised. "For Sarah. For the little girl you were—" We fell asleep in each other's arms, alarms set for an early start. The woods were shrouded in morning mist as we picked our way through undergrowth that had reclaimed old paths. 20 years had transformed Camp Wildwood into a ghost of itself, cabins collapsing, the once clear lake choked with lily pads. We found cabin 12 through Taylor's remarkable memory, its door hanging askew on rusted hinges. "This is where they kept the records," she said, voice hushed as if we might disturb sleeping spirits. "In the maintenance equipment." Using the GPS on our phones, we oriented ourselves toward the coordinates. The hike was challenging, fallen trees and thorny bushes blocking our way as we moved deeper into the forest. Taylor led with single-minded focus, checking her phone periodically to ensure we stayed on course. "Should be right around." She stopped abruptly, grabbing my arm. "Look." Ahead, nearly hidden by overgrowth, a depression in the ground. Not natural, too regular, too rectangular. My heart pounded as we approached. Taylor knelt beside what was unmistakably a grave, long settled but still distinguishable to knowing eyes. "When we need to call Davis," she said, voice thick with emotion. "We can't disturb this." While she made the call, I sat beside her on a fallen log, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. 20 years of silence broken by a child's forgotten witness statement, preserved in a rusted box by chance or fate. "And they're sending a forensic team," Taylor reported after ending the call. "We need to wait here." We sat in somber silence, holding hands as morning light filtered through the trees. I couldn't help wondering how differently our lives might have unfolded if that summer had never been interrupted by tragedy, if we'd maintained our childhood friendship into adolescence and beyond. "Do you think we would have found each other again?" I asked softly. "If not for the time capsule?" Taylor considered this, her thumb tracing circles on my palm. I'd like to think so. Some connections refuse to stay broken." The sound of approaching vehicles broke the spell. Official cars navigated the overgrown access road, and soon the clearing filled with police and forensic investigators. Officer Davis approached us directly. "Santu seemed to have solved a 20-year-old cold case," he said, professional but impressed. "And Mrs. Jenkins came in this morning with her husband's confession." "Will it be enough?" Taylor asked. "Without him alive to face charges?" Davis nodded. "Combined with what they find here, it'll bring closure to Sarah's family at least." We remained as the team carefully excavated the site, Taylor insisting on seeing the process through. When they uncovered human remains, confirming our worst suspicions, she gripped my hand so tightly it hurt. "She can rest now," I whispered, pressing my lips to her temple. "And so can you." 6 months passed like a dream. Winter surrendered to spring, and spring mellowed into early summer, a time of renewal that felt appropriate for where our lives had taken us. The Sarah Bennett case made headlines throughout the Midwest. Robert Jenkins, though deceased, was posthumously connected to both her death and years of financial fraud. The investigation uncovered links to organized crime that stretched back decades, with the summer camps serving as one front in a complex money laundering operation. For Taylor, the resolution brought a peace I watched transform her day by day. The burden of an unconscious memory, the weight she'd carried without knowing, lifted from her shoulders. She stood taller, laughed easier, and the remaining walls around her heart crumbled completely. We were in my apartment on a lazy Sunday morning when Taylor casually dropped a bombshell over coffee. "And I've been thinking of selling my house," she said, stirring cream into her mug. "It's too big for one person." "Selling?" And echoed, trying to ignore the sudden knot in my stomach. "Are you leaving Kansas City?" She looked confused, then laughed. "Oh, Todd, no. Quite the opposite, actually." She reached across the table for my hand. "I thought maybe we could look for a place together, something with enough space for your practice and mine." I blinked at her, coffee forgotten. "You want to live together?" "And work together," she said, eyes bright with the vision she'd clearly been nurturing privately. "Sir Sans, remember that joint practice idea? I've been running the numbers. With your communication skills and my medical expertise, we could create something special." The proposal left me momentarily speechless. Not because I didn't want it, but because I wanted it so desperately I feared jinxing it by accepting too eagerly. "And I'd have to give up my apartment," I said stupidly. Taylor's smile widened. "That's generally how moving in together works, yes." 2 weeks later we found it. An old Victorian on the outskirts of town with a converted carriage house perfect for our joint clinic. The paperwork moved quickly, abetted by the surprising success of our professional collaboration. Taylor's endorsement had brought me legitimate clients, and my techniques had enhanced her practice's reputation for handling difficult cases. The day we received the keys, we brought Edison to explore his new kingdom. As the cat investigated every corner with proprietorial interest, Taylor led me to the garden outside. "There's something else I wanted to show you," she said, guiding me toward a stone bench beneath an ancient oak tree. Sitting on the bench was a metal box, brand new but styled to look vintage. I raised an eyebrow questioningly. "It's our own time capsule," she explained, opening it to reveal contents she'd already placed inside. The photo of us as children. Adoption papers for Thunder, newspaper clippings about Sarah's case, and the collar Ranger had worn during his first treatment with us. "For our future," she said softly. "So we never forget how we found each other again." I was touched beyond words, kneeling to examine the mementos she'd chosen. "This is perfect. What else should we add?" "Whatever you'd like," she said. But something in her tone made me look up. Taylor had joined me on one knee, producing a small velvet box from her pocket. My breath caught as she opened it, revealing a simple but stunning emerald ring. "And Nora Price," she said, voice steady despite the emotion shining in her eyes. "And I've loved you in 2 different lifetimes, as children and now as adults. I don't want to waste any more time apart. Will you marry me?" The world narrowed to just this moment, the dappled sunlight through oak leaves, the scent of freshly turned earth in our garden, the weight of Taylor's expectant gaze. Edison appeared from nowhere, rubbing against both our legs as if offering his approval. "Yes," I whispered, then laughed through sudden tears. "Oh, of course, yes." She slid the ring onto my finger with hands that finally trembled, betraying her nervousness. When she kissed me, it felt like sealing a promise 20 years in the making. Later that evening, as we sat on our new porch watching fireflies emerge in the twilight, Taylor's head rested comfortably on my shoulder. The weight felt right, like a counterbalance I'd been missing my entire life. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked quietly. I considered the question, thinking about all the coincidences and choices that had led us here. A childhood friendship forgotten, a volunteering shift at a homeless shelter, a hidden time capsule, and the courage to seek truth no matter how painful. "And believe in connections," I answered finally. "Some are so strong they find a way to complete themselves, even across time." She lifted her head to look at me, her expression soft with wonder. "Like pieces finding where they belong." "Exactly," I agreed, kissing her gently. As night settled around our new home, I added the engagement ring, now photographed for preservation, to our time capsule before locking it. Taylor buried it beneath the oak tree, marking the spot with a small stone engraved simply with our initials and the date. "Unto another 20 years, she said, taking my hand as we walked back to the house that would witness all our tomorrows. "And 20 more after that." The path ahead was unmapped but no longer uncertain. Whatever challenges awaited, we would face them together. 2 once lost pieces finally found, 2 stories merged into one that was only just beginning.